I'm eating some Cheez-Its.
Ooh, what does that mean? Cheez-Its snapped.
It just means they good, they yummy.
It's not a particular.
Well,
those are big.
Yeah.
All right.
They're like super crunchy. Good stuff.
Good.
On sale this week, BOGO at Publix.
Oh, snap. I go through like a box of the whole grain ones like each week.
Do you? I usually
like
do that
that
with
and
Smart
Sun
Food
Chips.
popcorn. Oh, the Sun Chips, man.
Love Sun Chips.
I go through some Sun Chips. Do you remember when we were in college, Sun Chips decided to make their bags like super noisy?
Yes.
It's like, this is
Like
made
the
out of
eco-friendly
recycled
bags.
Yeah. I remember us watching Lost, and I remember like Hooper specifically getting mad at me because I was like crinkling the bag so much, and I'm like, I can't stop making noise.
Should have just poured them in a bowl.
Ruins the experience, John. It's too logical.
Dustin, I need you to stop crinkling those chips.
No, I will once we start going.
You've been working up the courage to stand your ground on that since college.
Since college.
Speaking of Stranger Things, when we were watching the last episode, there's like a Walmart near us, and I hate going to Walmart typically. I just avoid it when I can. But I think I had to go. They sell the kind of coffee that I like there. So I went and I was walking to the coffee aisle, and in the freezer, like on the end cap of the aisle, they had this frozen pizza, and it was the Surfer Boy pizza.
Really?
And I was like, oh, and this was before like the show had even premiered, like the season.
Wow.
And it just said Stranger Things, Surfer, and I was like, oh, well, this will probably make sense. So I got it, and then I was like, why did I buy this? I don't like frozen pizza. I would just order a pizza, But I decided to make it on the last night. It was fine.
Okay.
It was good for frozen pizza. I always burn the roof of my mouth eating frozen pizza.
Gotta let it cool, John.
I'm impulsive. It's all mushy. I don't know. I like Papa John's.
It doesn't make any sense though, because Surfer Boy didn't sell frozen pizzas. They made fresh pizza.
Yes, I guess that's true.
When did
the packaging was really neat?
When did frozen pizza really like take off?
Oh, you're asking the
like
wrong.
The 70s or the 80s.
Yeah,
I'm guessing, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's probably in the TV dinner craze of the late 70s.
Yeah.
That recently, you'd think that like, just with the advent of like the commercial freezer, they'd be like, or the consumer freezer, that you'd be like, what can we freeze? But I don't know, maybe
I would bet too, like I have no backing to solidify this, but I would bet like pizza as a meal probably wasn't like super popular in the US until like the late 60s, early 70s.
Oh, I was trying to search
I
it.
can imagine like people in their 50s being like, let's go grab a pizza.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't know
grab
if
a pie.
it existed. I mean, it obviously existed, but I don't think it was like, like a pizza place.
You never would have heard Humphrey Bogart say, hey, Dame, let's go get a pizza
Yeah,
pie.
I never saw Don Draper eating a slice of pizza,
Right.
I don't know.
So according to my quick research, Totino's started in the 60s.
Okay.
Well, this says in 1951, a businessman in Chicago named Emile DeSalvi launched his Pizza Fro brand. Sorry, not band.
What kind of music is Pizza Fro?
It was a precursor to the Chuck E. Cheese band.
Pizza Fro brand of frozen pies that by 1954 had sold over 5 million frozen pizzas.
Fuck.
1954.
Oh.
There's a whole for those interested, there's a whole CNBC article called The History of Frozen Pizza from Totino's to DiGiorno.
Cool.
Somebody's job was to, but there it is.
The data.
At the very top of Google. So this is written in 2020. This is in May 2020. There was they're like, what do we do? Where do we send all these reporters? We can't send them anywhere. Hey, go find out everything there is to know about frozen pizza.
Frozen pizza.
Yeah.
I always pass frozen pizza in like the store, and I'm like, no. Dustin, this might interest you. Have you ever heard of the Little Caesars when the Batman came out? They partnered with Little Caesars. You know about this?
Yes.
About the Batman calzone?
They tried to make it into a bat shape, but it's They were just like, I don't know. And I
we got one.
Oh,
Did
no.
you ever try it?
No, I didn't.
It was really good.
Was
and
it?
It was so ugly looking.
Yes. I was gonna say the advertisement looks ugly. I can't imagine it even having that much care in the store.
It was just odd. I was like, who's this for?
That's funny.
It's not a kid-friendly film.
No.
So we're got together to talk about Stranger Things tonight. Kellen couldn't make it. Although I wanted to address something right off the
taken by Vecna.
He's Will Byers in this episode.
with his bowl haircut.
If you see my lights flashing, it's Kellen.
I have things I want to say.
But Kellen and I shared a similar. I want to talk to you guys about this because a very similar assumption, which wasn't this the last season of this show? And you were both like, no. And I was like, I could have sworn it was too. And I don't know if it's because of the 2-part stupid marketing that made us all just assume that. And they're like, well, we never said it was but who does a 2-parter on your not final season? And not even a 2-parter. It's not even like it was 7 more episodes. It's like, here's 7. And then we couldn't figure out how to do the last 2. So now they're just 90 minutes and like 300 minutes.
It feels to me like a mandate from Netflix. Like, you need to have this show on at this time. And they were like, all right, well, here's the deal. We can deliver the first few episodes at that time, but the last 2 we're still working on. We can't finish them by that date. So we'll give you, volume 2 by this date. And like that's how that feels to me.
That's exactly what I assumed, because the last 2 were pretty effects heavy and they were probably just wrapping all that stuff up.
Like, we're finished, but we need 8 weeks to render the last episode.
Pretty much.
Right.
But but they put out a statement several months ago that was like, probably at the beginning of the year, that was like, hey, this, just so you know, season 4 will be releasing in this structure, but the story of Eleven and her friends will conclude with season 5 premiering in the future. So
it would be easy to miss. It left out to me because I wanted this to be the last season before it aired, because I don't think anything should just go on. But I get why they did it now. It makes more sense. So it's like, okay, I'll watch one more.
Yeah, for sure.
That assumption, it didn't really change how I was looking at the show. At a certain point during the last episode with the remaining runtime, I was like, well, this certainly can't be the last season, because like nothing's going on. Like what a strange, it was just like, so I can't give like thoughts on the series overall, because obviously it's not done, which is like half the reason I wanted to talk about this. Was at the time we talked about doing this, I was like, yes, and the thing will be finished and we can just talk about the whole show. So I'll say that anybody listening right now is probably already watched it. So I don't think we're introducing new people to the show. So I guess I will just say that, at this point, if I were to tell someone, like, if someone were to ask me, like, would you, if you could, has it been worth it to keep up with Stranger Things? I'd probably say yes. I don't think that this is something I would rewatch, which is, as you both know, is important to me when it comes to like things worth investing your time in. Is like, could I watch this again and get more out of it? I know some people might make the argument that, well, you get a lot out of it because it's like Vecna's the main villain, but I don't see how you could retroactively go watch the first 3 seasons and derive any more meaning from the, interactions with the villain, the antagonist.
Only small. Like I've seen clips from the first 3 seasons where like that clock chime is present in all the seasons. The tick tock kind of stuff is there in the Upside Down. And like, it's clear they're, whether or not they always knew like Vecna and here's the grandfather clock and blah, blah, blah. I don't know. But, or whether they're like, okay, now let's just retroactively like make sense of why we use those sound effects in at those spots. But it did make a few things like, oh, that's kind of cool. Like, you can kind of there's that moment in season 1, if you remember, right before Will gets taken, he sees like this shadowy figure, which I always assumed was like the Demogorgon, but looking at it again, it doesn't really look like the Demogorgon, and looking at it now, it's like, oh, that kind of looks like Vecna. So I don't know whether or not I mean, that would really not make a lot of sense for Vecna to be in Hawkins, but anyway, I don't know. Having said that, like, there's a few things that it changes, but overall, you're right.
He may not have really been in Hawkins. That's part of like the weirdness of this season. It could have been that
Will was seeing him. Oh, and then the other thing they mentioned was, do you remember when Will was in the Upside Down? The only reason he didn't get destroyed or killed or whatever was that he kept singing his favorite song.
Yeah.
And that's obviously what saves Max in this. And so, there were some seeds planted.
Sure. I could argue that it's pretty easy to write themselves into a hole with that and be like, that's a good enough reason still in season 4, but at the same time, I don't want to assume cynically, like there's no way they could have, but
sure,
whether they knew or not, as for the first part of the series, when you have no idea who he is, I'm just kind of like, all right, I wanted to know stuff about him, but it wasn't like curiosity. It was like, I'm hoping this is more interesting because he's just sort of like Satan. He's just kind of, he's just kind of Satan. And, I'm trying to figure out if there's more to him. And then at a certain point I was like, why do they keep showing this guy who used to work at the lab? And I was like, is that guy Vecna? And then, it was probably good to actually enlist an antagonist who has a personality and a motivation and, lines, lots and lots of lines, as opposed to, 3 seasons of kind of an unseen amorphous evil, which can get stale after a while. And I think people probably did complain that it was stale in those. I mean, I'll say this. I think the first season of Stranger Things is still its strongest to me. I think there's way more going on. There's way more intrigue. It's just a whole lot stronger. There's a lot more of a slow build. There's a lot more horror. It kind of became a little, it was always sci-fi, but it leaned more heavily on like sci-fi, like creature confrontation in the second and third seasons. That we got a little bit more than that in this. I've got a lot of problems with it. I think at least, there's a lot of things that don't work for me, but, I'll pick those apart later. Overall, I'm not going to say I'm looking forward to the final season. And when it comes out, I'm sure I'll be excited between, new things to look at, slick marketing, and nothing to do that weekend. It's not very high praise, but I'll echo a review I heard earlier today. At worst, the show is mindless entertainment. And at its best, it's actually good at making you feel things. But I wouldn't put it up there with like greatest shows ever made. I wouldn't put it up of, Netflix's greatest shows. I just think it's an effective exercise in everything that's popular today. Nostalgia, nostalgia marketing, Stephen King-esque storylines, and whatever. Science, whatever. I don't know. The things, whatever. Those things. Meme stuff, basically.
Sure.
Anyway. So 3 star, John, I don't know.
3, sure, it's fine. Yeah, that's what it sounds like to me. You're giving it a 3,
sure.
3.5. Yeah. John, what do you think?
I really enjoyed it. It's hard for me to compare it to the others because I think they're all distinct in their own way. So I kind of look at the show as just like one long thing. Mm-hmm. So it was consistent with the other seasons for me. I agree that it's not, I wouldn't put it on like my best shows of all time list or anything. It's not The Sopranos or something, but it is always entertaining, and I think it's creative in its own way. With the nostalgia thing, I feel like that was almost kind of one of the pioneers in that nostalgia baity type stuff. It came out. I mean, it's crazy because it's been around for so long. It came out before like The Force Awakens, for instance. So it kind of fed into that whole '80s nostalgia thing before it was really a thing. And so I think a lot of that piggybacked on the success of this show. But I mean, I think at the end of the day, I enjoy watching it. I think that it's always great when the kids grow up and they're actually for the most part pretty good at acting still, and the cast is good. They always bring on new characters each season that are interesting. There was we won't go into spoilers, but there was a particular character this season that was interesting. It wasn't the best written character ever or anything, but when a certain thing happened, you felt for that character, and
I think we can spoil the show at this point.
Oh, okay. I mean, like the show has so much going on, but when they introduce Eddie, right, Eddie it kind of becomes a focal point of the whole plot on the earthly side of things. And then obviously at the end of the season, he dies. And they kind of had a little arc with that character. He wasn't the most prominent character, but it worked for me. It's those little moments that I like, and the show always delivers on that sort of stuff. In terms of the mythology of things, I mean, it was a little clunky, but I don't expect it to. I don't need answers to some of this stuff, and so it's the explanations are fine for me. It was always kind of like ripping off Akira to me in a way. So it's like, I get it. There's, psychic children that, so it delivers on what I want from it. I'm not expecting, the most sophisticated thing. And it's a fun, entertaining show with a good cast. And I like it.
Yeah, I agree, John. I mean, I'm going to give this a pretty favorable review. I mean, I really enjoy Stranger Things and always have. I remember watching that first season just kind of on a whim because I was like, oh, this is Spielberg-esque, and kind of wanting that itch scratched. And I thought it did it well. I would agree with what Hooper said earlier that I do think season 1 is its strongest, but that may just be because it plays into a lot of what I would want in a Spielberg-esque, Stephen King-esque, 80s-esque thing. And then as the series progressed, of course, when the kids got older and all that, you kind of lose the Spielbergian vibe and then fully embrace the Stephen King vibe. And so the show changes. And with that, I think season 2 kind of was like a lower point, but still not unenjoyable. And then season 3, I really enjoyed. I thought that was fun, like summer blockbuster type, stuff. And then with season 4, like, I'm always so tempted to say like this show is a guilty pleasure, but I think guilty pleasures are like not good. And I think this show's plenty good. I think it makes me feel guilty maybe because like I hear a lot of, critics that I respect and admire kind of saying like, well, it's not that good. And I'm like, well, I don't know. I like it. Like, yeah, the dialogue's clunky at times and the performances are so-so. And I think a fair chunk of these characters could go. But I really enjoy it. And I didn't find myself like forcing myself to keep going on this. When Stranger Things 4 was announced, I was like, cool, I'll watch it. And I watched it. And I watched it relatively quickly, and I was on board with pretty much everything. What's great about this season, I think, is it embraces some of the horror elements. And so there are times, especially earlier in the season, when Vecna's haunting these kids, that it feels like it or something that is very Stephen Kingian, if that's a word. And then almost as it goes along, it becomes like a superhero movie in a weird way. Like you've got a villain who's intimately connected to our hero. And like, it's very tropey in that way. But again, doesn't bother me. And I think maybe that's why it feels like a guilty pleasure is like all of these elements I've seen before. I just haven't maybe seen them in this particular order. So it doesn't feel like super unique and new and fresh, but it doesn't feel stale either. It just feels like, oh, I've seen this. It's just jumbled with other things that I've also seen, which I enjoy all of these things. So bring them all together. That's fine. What's great about this season 2 is they made the wise choice, because the cast is so large, to split them up and allow for different storylines. And so we're kind of bouncing between Hawkins and Russia and out west somewhere. I never quite clear. They filmed it in Albuquerque, but regardless, like, jumping around in geographical space allowed for like these different factions to form. And I thought that was kind of cool. And we're bouncing back and forth between them. Do all of those stories work? No. But they work enough to be enjoyable to watch. So for instance, Hopper is in Russia and we follow Joyce and Murray as they go to rescue him. I felt like that was bloated. Like to me, that's a very simple story that didn't require all of these episodes to get them from here to here. But it kind of like padded it out. And so sometimes it felt like, not like it was a slog to get through those sections, but like, oh, this probably could have been streamlined or excised completely until the last few episodes, right? And just find Joyce something else to do, or don't. Like she's not involved until she is, and that's later, and then you can kind of streamline that storyline. That would have been fine too if they had let us believe Hopper was dead for half the season, and then truncate all of that in, at the end. I think would have been fine.
But it's almost like there's an A plot, a B plot, and a C plot.
Right.
And the Hopper stuff to me was kind of the C plot, right? And yes. The A kind of switched back and forth with the B, what was most important in that moment. But I agree with what you're saying.
Yeah, because Elle and Mike and Will and Jonathan and our new character Argyle are kind of all in this other storyline, this what I would probably consider the B storyline, if only because most of the heavy lifting of like who is Vecna and all of that kind of stuff is done by the A story, even though the actual details are all revealed in the B story. So that's weird. But it's also to me B story because when it comes down to our climax in these last two episodes, really Elle is in trouble because she's facing up against Vecna. But like Will and Jonathan and Argyle and Mike, they're not really in any danger. Like they don't really have like a huge climactic battle to participate in. So to me, that's the B story. But, again, you're right. It kind of flip flops a little bit. But I really did enjoy a lot of what they did with the character progressions. And I think that's its strength, right? Like we all have those characters that we really like, and really that core group of Mike, Will, Dustin, Lucas, and Elle and Max are like that's the core group. And for those characters, I think they all got something to do that was interesting and move their character forward a little bit. Except maybe Dustin, who just kind of like did plotty things rather than like character introspection things. But like if those are our core group, like we moved the needle on some of them, and some of them came late. Like Will, that was the last two episodes' job to really draw him out a little bit. And they just kind of hint at some stuff earlier and then draw it out a little bit better in the last two. But like, yeah, I mean, all in all, I guess to wrap all that up, like I enjoyed where the characters went. I'm starting to see a through line for some of them, which is interesting and necessary, because characters like Max, we'll talk more about maybe the bloated cast here in a minute, but characters like Max have just kind of like been there. And I thought, oh, okay, in season 2, she's just kind of there. In season 3, I guess she's there because Billy is a thing, and this gives some, earthly tie for Billy and like grounds us in like, oh no, Billy, whatever. But then in this season, it's like, oh, okay, now we're going to finally prove to you that Max is an important member of this group. And I think there's still a few characters that don't have a clear purpose like that. Like I think Jonathan is one. I think Robin is another. These characters who don't really seem to serve much purpose in the story. And yeah, so all that to say, like I enjoy it. I think I agree with you. It's not Breaking Bad. It's not going to be the top of my list of best TV shows ever made, but it's certainly interesting to watch. And I don't regret having seen any of it. And I am looking forward to the final season. So, yeah, that's the review in a nutshell. We can take a few other things apart, like Lost comparisons and whatnot. But yeah, so we're Hooper, what gripes you got?
I'll say in a general sense, anytime we left Hawkins, I was about half as interested in whatever the story was. So since most storylines occur out of Hawkins, I was disengaged from the show most of the time. I really liked what occurred in Hawkins. I at first was annoyed with the what's his name? Lucas storyline, because I was like, okay, I've seen this before. He's trying to be one of the cool kids, but they very quickly have him like literally run away from that, like fuck this, and leave once he realizes they're crazy assholes. Okay, so we quickly got away from that trope. I really loved everything with him and Max, especially by the end of the season. I thought that Caleb McLaughlin like had one of the most effective performances in the entire season. Yeah. So I loved everything. I loved everything with Max. I liked the two of them. I really loved, speaking of new characters, I really loved Eddie. I at first, like his first couple scenes, I was like, oh God, like what is this character? And then they very quickly, with the scene where she buys the drugs from him, humanize him instantly. Like, okay,
such a good point.
He's a 3-dimensional character. Like he's not just some weird freak. At first I was like, I'm not sure what this person is supposed to be in the story. And then I instantly got it. Like, okay, I understand this person. And they very effectively, use him. And I really love obviously it's really the guitar scene is cool. Yeah. And, his not run away thing, his sacrifice, that's all just fodder for Connor's amygdala. So, I was into all that, and that was fine. I actually really loved Dustin talking to his uncle about like he died and he's a hero, and his uncle's like fuck, and just start crying. So that was all good. I liked everything with Steve. And I liked everything.
He's my favorite character. The
Harrington Hammer. I liked everything with him, and oh boy, did I hate everything else? I think everything else was a mixture. It was anywhere from not into it to don't like this at all. I like Hopper, but I didn't like the Russia stuff. I love Murray. Murray has a danger to be obnoxious, but I actually really liked him because he was making total sense during all of it. He was funny. He kept us on plot. He cracked jokes. And so he was the highlight of all the Russia stuff. I hate Argyle. My wife explained, nobody explains things to me. My wife said that, I understand why he has to be there because the other three are so serious and they need someone to balance out the tone. And I was like, okay, so he does need to be here, but I was very annoyed by his performance. I wasn't into it. It was heavily saturated with all the stoners that had come before him. For me. And everything else, I don't know. It all just depended on what if it was adjacent to the actual plot. Like Nancy stuff, not that interested. But then Nancy and Vecna stuff, okay, I liked that. So I don't know. Everything else was kind of like it just depended on the context. And as for 11, one of the more interesting elements of the show for me is the psychological angle of what it must be like to be 11. Having your childhood spent in the lab, having Stockholm syndrome for, Dr. Brenner, her relationship with other kids. I think they explored that in the second season, but obviously her connection to the villain is very interesting. So I guess for me, the season was just uneven. I understood structurally all the reasons why it could be good to have the characters split up in these multiple threads. And of course, it does play to one of the big strengths of this series, which is editing. They're very good with their editing. Their editing's great. So in the hands, it just so happens that the show has excellent editors. So we're balancing all these storylines that to me are, like I just said, majority not interesting, but the editing kept me engaged in how they relate to each other. I don't know. So those are vague thoughts. I'm not sure how or where to carry them, but there was a few things that worked for me really well this this season, but it's not the Kate Bush song or, whatever else.
Well, if we're going to talk like characters, right? Like, I agree with you. The Eddie character needed to be humanized really quickly because it was such a large performance.
Yeah.
And the only other character that gets a large performance like that is Murray. And you're right. I kind of can't stand Murray. I think he's one of those that can go.
I think Murray's been interesting. This was the season where he kind of jumped out at me a little bit, like not in a great way, because he was like the weird gonzo reporter type character. Mm-hmm. And this, he's like, he knows how to fight people and he knows all these different languages. And it was kind of like he was a utility character, but it didn't bother me. It was a little bit like, okay, you changed who this character is to an extent, but
so he can serve.
I think that actor is great, even if I didn't really love the direction the character went in. But I think, absolutely, I get what you're saying.
I think that's where I'm at, John. It's like he becomes like the Swiss Army knife character. Yeah. Like we just need to get out of a jam. Well, Murray can do it. Murray can figure it out, right? Yeah. And because he knows the language and he can do karate and blah blah blah, right? And so to me, like I don't particularly find him funny, and I also don't really see him as a human either. So that to me is weird. But the Eddie character, he gets a huge performance just like Murray, but very quickly he got that really quiet moment with what's her face? Chrissy. And so he and Chrissy get to have this really super quiet moment in the woods, and that humanizes him. And then when you see his like home life and all that kind of stuff, and then the whole town turns against him, and we know that he's innocent. Yeah. It's like he too is a victim. Then we're immediately on his side, right? It's like a threefold punch of like, see him out of his element with a cheerleader, see his home life, and then immediately he becomes a victim. And so that's something that we never got out of Murray, right? Yeah. So that's, yes, that's the Eddie character. The characters, so I loved Max. Like I said, I felt like they finally gave her a reason to exist. Is it a little bit coincidental that she happens to be marked and she's a member of our main group? Yeah, sure. But again, like, I don't care. Like it's fine. And because what they do with it is cool. And like, I really do love that Kate Bush moment and the moment of her like coming back to Lucas, because to me that, like, say what you will about like Mike and Elle, but like Lucas and Max have become the heart of the show for me. And so to me, like, that's why that worked. It wasn't necessarily, this is epic, which I think is what some people are, loving about it. It's like, it's slow motion and she's running. And I'm like, no, like she gets to go back to this guy that she keeps pushing away, but who persistently loves her. Yep. Like, to me, that's the story. And so I loved that. Where she ends at the end of this season is sad. Like, I genuinely felt sad for her and for Lucas. And so, yeah, this was her season. Like, above Eddie, above everybody else, like this was Max's year. I mean, the stuff with Elle, I can take it or leave it. Like, I love the revelations there that we get, and the idea of her finding her powers again and all of that. Beyond that, like her relationship with Mike and her issues with the bully and all of that, it's like, yeah, it's serviceable, but I don't really feel that, too much. Although I will say it was super cathartic when that mean girl got smacked with that skate. Like, I was like, oh yes,
I felt that through the awesome. TV.
Yeah. Because they really do make you hate her, but I don't really feel like Elle's pain. I'm just like, oh, what a jerk. You deserve.
She was kind of a jerk for no reason. Almost like comically villainous, but
yes.
Yeah.
It's like they watched Mean Girls and they were like, just do Regina George, but like in the 80s and meaner. Then you have the stuff with Will. The stuff with Will works for me, but it'll depend on where it goes, right? Because what they're setting up here, it seems clear, is that he has feelings for Mike. Mm-hmm. That can't go anywhere. So it has to be a tragedy.
Or can it?
It can't. It can't. It can't. They can't. As much as I see Max and Lucas as the heart of this, the Duffer Brothers see it as Mike and Elle. They're not going to break up Ross and Rachel or Jim and Pam to do that, and it's just not going to happen. But so depending on kind of the future, I'll see where Will ends up. And I said recently, we were talking about this on a text thread, and I said Will is a character who essentially just exists to be searched for, and they haven't really found anything for him to do other than that. And so this was kind of a step in a direction for him to have something to do. But yeah, Argyle, like I liked Argyle. Yeah, you're right. Like there's nothing new, but that's the whole show. There's nothing new here. It's just like repurpose things that I already enjoy. And so Argyle I enjoyed. Steve Harrington is like, we have to protect this man because this man has had the most growth of anybody on this show. And like talking about his Harrington clan going on mountainous road trips. I'm like, he deserves it. Give this man a family road trip.
And they were totally setting us up for that kill. There was so many breadcrumbs that he was going to die and that Eddie was going to take his place. And I was like already setting myself up and I was like, that's so obvious. And I'm glad that they subverted that by not doing it and killing. I'm not glad they killed Eddie, right? But it was it was an interesting narrative choice as opposed to killing Steve when you've been telegraphing it throughout most of the season. So.
I never once thought they were going to kill Steve. I didn't feel
I thought they might. No. Yeah, I really thought they might.
No, I honestly, what I was thinking the whole time, he's like, yeah, I want like 6 kids. And Nancy's looking at him like, I'm not having 6 kids. He's like,
well, I'm so used to it now. Like in The Walking Dead, it's always like if a character has a moment of happiness or something, they're going to die. If they're talking about their future or whatever, that's a way.
There's no future.
Got this girlfriend back home.
Every time that he was talking about that with Nancy, or he was, Eddie had a line that was like talking with Steve about Dustin, and he's like, Dustin really looks up to you, and you're like a hero to him. And I was like, oh God, here we go.
If Jonathan wasn't one of the cast members, I would have thought that too. But all I was thinking was, oh, okay, but it's not to be, because as soon as the season ends and Jonathan's there, we're gonna bury these feelings, And so that's that. I think maybe that's what kept me from jumping to that conclusion or not taking the bait, was like, yeah, but Jonathan, like, I guess to me, that was the inherent conflict of that dialogue, not Steve might die. It's like, yeah, but she's dating somebody. And
which they're going to have to give Jonathan more to do. I don't know what you do with Jonathan, but he's got to do something. He can't just exist. You have to do something with him. If you handed season 5 to me right now, I wouldn't know what in the world to do with the Byers boys.
He needs to accidentally murder Argyle.
Well, that was one of my issues with the 3rd season, was it did feel like they split Nancy and Jonathan up, and they were reporters for the newspaper. But it was kind of just like, these characters are spinning their wheels a little bit. And I like that they separated Nancy and Jonathan this season.
Yeah.
And I think that Jonathan, to me, is kind of like, he's like the adult in the room. He doesn't really do a lot, but I did like his conversation with Will when they were prepping the pizza dough freezer. And I think that sort of stuff works, even if he's not the character that's going to be driving anything. I like the actor that plays him. And I always do think back, like one of the strongest things in the 1st season is him looking for Will and the way his character progresses throughout that 1st season. And he really hasn't done a lot since then, but
and that's a shame.
I do hope they have more for him to do, but I like the purpose he serves in the show as it is.
I would imagine that next season. So at the end of this last episode, there's that moment before they see, like, the everything that's teasing season 5. Will has like that moment where he like touches the back of his head, right? And so it's like, I'm back in Hawkins, I can feel Vecna, that kind of stuff. I would imagine season 5 is going to put Will in danger again, and we're going to get to see that protective bit come out from Jonathan, and that's going to be his role in season 5 is basically what it was in season 1. It's I have to find and protect Will. Sucks for Noah Schnapp, but I don't think he's going to have a whole lot to do next season other than just be searched for or protected. Yeah, as far as Robin goes, because I mentioned her specifically as somebody who could go, she's like another character that does things, like she's there to like bounce lines of dialogue off of, but I don't find her as funny, I think, as people the Duffer Brothers think she is, and I don't find her as like dramatically interesting either. And part of that is because her only real dramatic storyline here takes place in like episode 1 and episode 8. Like they're so far apart. There's nothing for her in the middle of that other than like the reference that which is paid off later of like, I was the last baby to walk. And it's like, well, that's not a dramatic storyline, my friend. That's just a fact. That's just an anecdote about your life. Again, y'all are going to have to do something with her season 5 for me to feel like she was worth spending time with, because right now she doesn't really do much.
I'll say for me too, like what I constantly like about this show is like you take these stock tropey characters and then you invert them. Right. So like Eddie, for instance, when we were introduced to that character, I was like, oh, this is going to be a hard ass upperclassman character. And he's going to like give the boys a hard time for missing which it sounds so trivial, all the stuff that went on later in the season, but for missing the Dungeons and Dragons session. But then it's immediately changed, and he's a nice guy who actually cares about the kids. And like the stuff with Lucas, like the wanting to be on the basketball team, be a popular kid. And I like the subversion of that, where it's immediately clear that these are like, bad dudes that he's fallen in with. And he realizes it's kind of never in him to be that. He is who he is. He's friends with Mike and Will and Dustin, and they play Dungeons and Dragons and all that, right? And even like the I forget his name, the Russian guard that Hopper shares the prison cell with, like that could have just been a stock character, but I'm glad that they gave him some dimension. And by the end of the season, I like that character. I was glad that he made
I like
it
him
through.
too.
Yeah. So it's like that always works for me. It's like you take a character like Sean Astin's character in the second season was kind of like that. He was just like a dopey dude. And then by the end, he was like solving a bunch of stuff. And so like, I wish they had done something like we brought up Argyle. Like I wish they had done something like that with Argyle a little bit, where he was like, oh, he's the stoner character. And I know he kind of comes in and helps at the end with the pizza place, but I'm hoping that they'll kind of do something like that. But that's like none of it is. I agree with you, Dustin, that none of it is original. It's like remixing bits and pieces from like Nightmare on Elm Street and It and E.T. and all this kind of stuff, right? But I like when they put it all in a blender and they hit the button. I like what comes out. It's and the characters I think are like the real strength of the show, more so than the high concept mythology of everything. I like that core relationship between the main group of kids, and now it's kind of bled over. And like we mentioned with Steve, like that whole thing has been great to watch because he was the typical high school bully. He like beat up Jonathan the first season. I hated that character. Mm-hmm. And now to see like, I'm worried about him dying. It's like, they've done a really good job with that kind of stuff. So it's more of that kind of, you think that character will go a certain way and their stock character, and then they end up completely different. So, well,
you mentioned the mythology. Can we chat about the mythology for a second?
Yeah.
So one of my biggest fears as the show progresses is that it's going to pull a Lost, and like we get no answers, no conclusions, and what little we do get is just completely unsatisfying. Like that's always been my fear, and that's my fear of jumping into anything that's like there's a mystery afoot. I'm like, well, it's going to suck by the end, because Lost did that to me. Thank you, Damon and Carlton. Like that's how you twisted my brain. But having said that, like there are some answers this year. We get some answers about, the origins of the project that Elle is a part of. We learn a little bit about Brenner. We learn a little bit about all that. We learn about the Upside Down. We learn about One and Vecna and all of this stuff, and learn who our big bad is and put a face to the evil that's been around. How did you guys feel about those reveals? And is there anything that's like still lingering in your mind? Like, I really need to know this.
I feel like for me, it answered a lot. Like it's different than Lost in that the mysteries are smaller to me. Like Lost was kind of like when they answered one thing, it led to another or two or three more questions. Right. And I feel like this, it's like, I could always make that jump and go, there's a bad guy in the Upside Down, and 11 opened the rift, and that's what's causing it. And it's just kind of like the details need to be finessed. And it kind of did that for me. And I think going forward, I would rather them not answer a ton of stuff and overly complicate it. If they just kind of run with what they've already answered and wrap up some details on that, that would be perfect for me. The one thing that did bother me that didn't make any sense was, and I liked this character in the season too, the Matthew Modine's character, the Dr. Brenner. Papa. Yeah. Because I liked their whole relationship, him and 11, because there's this awful guy who's like abused so many people, including 11, but he is like the key to unlocking all of this stuff. So they have to work together. Right. And he's like this, he beats up Paul Reiser, has him like chained and beat up, and just a bad dude. But it bothered me that they never explained how he was alive, because he has been gone since the first season, and you last saw him, he was just like being eaten alive by a demogorgon. It's like, I thought that they would be like, yeah, he survived, but it was like never brought up. That was like one thing where I was like, because it's just like a character coming back from the dead for the plot, Yeah, that was one thing that left out at me, and I was like, ugh. And I'm glad maybe it's a better thing that they didn't even address it and come up with some convoluted reason, because I thought the reason why Hopper was taken by the Russians was a little weird. I thought it would have made more sense if he had been in the Upside Down and then got nabbed by the Russians or what. I don't know. So that was a little clunky. So I'm glad that they didn't address it almost, but it did stand out. I was like, how is this character still breathing? I don't know. Where has he been?
I think that's my main question as well, is like, my brain says there has to be a reason. Like, the writers can't just say, we're bringing Brenner back and not think like, well, but how? They have to have had that conversation. Now, whether that ever makes its way onto screen, I don't know. But they have to have an answer for that. Like, that's
I would take it over the Emperor coming back to life in episode 9, right?
Yeah, right.
I would rather it be ambiguous and you just left to the imagination how he survived than something like that. But it was odd. That was an odd choice for me.
It is odd, but I kind of like a lot of the reveals here, and then there's like this moment where we get to see one as he goes. He's been cast out into the Upside Down, and he's seeing like demodogs and whatnot out in in the Upside Down, and he's all like scarred and whatnot. This is before he's like Vecna. And I'm just like, oh, so like maybe the Upside Down's just always existed, right? Like, whereas before I've been looking for an answer like, oh, it began when, and maybe it's just always been there. And so my brain is like, oh, okay, I can live with that. Like that it's not some huge like, well, you see, when Dr. Brenner first, he opened a portal and the portal created a thing. And it's like, oh, well, it just kind of makes sense. Like, there's an Upside Down because it's a part of our world. It's just upside down. Like, I get that. I'm still a little confused as to whether or not there's an Upside Down for every place in the world, or if it's just Hawkins. Like, can you leave Hawkins in the Upside Down and like travel to Las Vegas and do some Upside Down gambling? I don't know. Maybe the Upside Down has always existed, and like that made me realize like, oh, maybe some of the questions I'm asking are wrong. And so to that end, I'm like, I'm kind of on board. Like, I may not get all the answers I want, but you're right. Like, these mysteries are much smaller than Lost. With Lost, the expectation was so high because the questions were all philosophical questions, ethical questions, like metaphorical questions for real life things. And this is just like, how did dimension start? How did the thing happen? And Lost was, like, what does it mean to be alive? And you're like, I need a good, profound answer here, Damon. And he's like, I don't know, people, I guess.
There's a wheel you spin and the thing moves.
There's a wheel, it's ice. A donkey wheel.
There's ice.
And you go. Do stuff. I don't know.
Right.
It takes you back in time. I don't know. Whatever.
I read it as 11 created the Upside Down. That's how it came to me. That's how it appeared to me. It almost looked like she killed him so hard that she ripped a hole in space-time and created a hell dimension and just sort of pushed him into it. Because you're right. If we have multiple possibilities. Either there's an upside down everywhere, which, well, then why is Hawkins special?
Right.
Or the upside.
I guess the answer is only because Vecna. I guess everywhere else is just Demogorgons and Demodogs,
and they can't come out.
Oh, I always read it that Hawkins was special because that was where the portal opened.
Well, right.
Between the two worlds.
Or it's that, which is that there is a tear.
It's almost like the Nexus.
Which is why they even built the lab there in the first place. This is the same argument as Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Like whatever their town is located on top of Hellmouth. And it it's a place where otherworldly things happen because of its proximity to shit. And
see, but I assume that they were in the same lab, like the stuff with one that took place. I assume that was in the same building in Hawkins because she wasn't much younger than she was at the start of the first season, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, so I'd assume that was Hawkins.
So that would mean that they were possibly there to study the upside down, but they had no way to actually get in there. And once she ripped it open, they had a way to go in there because
unless they
implied.
I kind of got the impression that Brenner didn't even know about the upside down until Elle had ripped the hole open. Right. So they weren't there to study the upside down. They were there to study children.
Right. And then it wasn't until one disappeared that he became obsessed with finding him. Wasn't that what's implied? Yes. He became obsessed with finding him. And then that's all he was pushing the kids to do was develop their powers enough to where they could help locate him. Yeah. So, which explains his whole obsession
explore the tear also, I think, right?
Sure. I think like his like reason was like, I must find one. That was like his motivation, but his secondary reasoning and probably what he told whatever committee oversees the lab, like, I am totally not obsessed with one of my students. I want to explore this other realm. And they're like, sure, we'll give you funding as long as this isn't personal. Nope, it's totally not personal. Not personal at all. Just want to explore this otherworldly realm and find my son.
Told Paul Reiser.
I mean, So
that's another good subversion, by the way, the Paul Reiser being a good guy that works for the bad company.
Sure.
Yeah. The weird thing is, like, with Paul Reiser, I need to go back and rewatch those other seasons because I obviously remember that Paul Reiser was in them. I have no memory of anything that he did.
He was.
I don't think he was in the third season. I remember being in the second season.
He was just in 2, right?
He was in. Yeah, I can't remember.
I don't remember.
Same one with Sean Astin.
Yes, that was 2.
Because he was there when they were trying to escape the building.
Yes,
I thought that guy died. Honestly, like he was another character who showed up. I was like, isn't he dead too? There's a whole lot of that happened in the season. I was like, didn't he die?
Right.
And then I didn't care to go back and look.
The only death that sticks is Billy.
We saw a body.
Yep.
Yeah. And Bob.
And Bob.
Bob. Yeah.
And Barb.
And Barb.
Barb, of course.
Oh, they all start with B's.
Are there any characters currently named, like, start with a B?
No.
Bustin.
Bustin.
Dustin's brother will come into town. His cousin. His name is Bustin.
Boston.
I picture him with like a Jersey accent. What are you guys doing over here?
It's also played by Gaten Matarazzo, just with a mustache.
Yes.
Yeah. And huge dentures. Like gigantic teeth. Yeah. Again, I'm interested. Ironically, what has me more engaged with the show is the overall lore, like understanding how this all relates. Like it'll be much more of a judge of the show's prowess to me after it's done, to where it's like, do I buy the rules governing the Upside Down and its origins? I am interested in that. I definitely 100% love the setting of the show. The small town, middle American, sleepy town, it being this horrific, epicenter of evil. That's all good. I do, someone talked about, should there be like a huge time jump for the next season and why that's unavoidable or whatever. It's like this season is already so much like Infinity War. Anyways, they lose, a couple people die. And now we're going to do a time jump before we solve everything. Just like the Avengers did. Same time, these actors are visibly much older than their characters are. And I feel like that needs to be written into the show. A really good way to do that is just let 5 years go. Don't make it 5 years because then everyone's going to make Avengers jokes, but make it 4 years, make it 3 years. I don't know. But just like the fact that Will was walking around in that silly little bowl cut and he's like 7 feet tall and he's dressed like a 6-year-old. I was like, okay, he looks like he's dressed up as Will Byers for Halloween. He doesn't look like the character Will Byers.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like looking back on the first season and seeing how different. Yeah, it is. I mean, it's alarming.
Yeah,
it makes me feel old.
And originally I was like, okay, why didn't they give him like a haircut or something? Like change up his style. Someone pointed out like, oh, it's emblematic of his. He hasn't grown past his childlike dreams. Like he wants to sit. Hey, we'll play Dungeons and Dragons forever. And he's like, yeah, I have a girlfriend, dude. So I get it, but it's silly to see an actor who's so clearly gone through puberty with that haircut. He looks like Lloyd Christmas.
I saw on Instagram the hair stylist for the show. I found her account and she is like posting a bunch of behind the scenes stuff. And one of the things that she mentions about Will specifically is like, yeah, we know the haircut is a problem, but like it's a character thing because this is a character who hasn't found himself yet. So he's still getting the same haircut that his mom buys for him or gives him or whatever because he doesn't have a voice yet. He has not developed any agency as a human. So he's just being given, whatever it is.
I don't want to jump around, but I forgot to mention Mike earlier. Pretty much every scene with Mike this season, I cringed at. I either thought his performance wasn't good or his writing wasn't good or his narrative function wasn't good. Like, I just feel like him giving pep talks to 11 every season gets stale for me. And while, so I don't know what Finn Wolfhard is capable of as an actor, emotionally. I know that Millie Bobby Brown is capable of a lot. And there was some misplaced or overuse of over emotional acting, like both from Will. I thought, again, that actor is great, but like him like crying so hard in the car and Finn Wolfhard just ignoring him, it came off less like, wow, I'm sad for this character, more like Mike just completely beefing on letting or engaging with his friend. I suppose the moral of the story is everyone cries too much, but I shouldn't complain about it. I don't know.
I do think that like Finn Wolfhard is the weakest actor of the main group of kids.
I think so.
But I did
Dustin
like
knocked out of the park this season. Really, all three of the other kids.
And the actor who plays Lucas is fantastic.
Yeah,
and I think Will, when given good material, is a very good actor. I do agree that character doesn't really have a lot to do, but I loved him in season 2 when he was like the creepy spy, all of that. But I did like that they didn't actively make you hate Mike like they did last season. Because that character was insufferable when he was being like a jerk to Hopper and he was like the moody teenager, arrogant jerk guy. And I felt like almost like they had to like do a 180 on that character because it was so negatively received last time. And he had that like look with Hopper when they saw each other at the end of the season, like, I'm not a jerk anymore. And it was because they butted heads a lot. So I did like that. It was at least like, I don't hate this character anymore. Even though I do think he's probably like the weakest narratively of the bunch.
Yeah, I don't know whether it's that Finn Wolfhard is the weakest actor or if he's the most ready to be done with Stranger Things. I think it could be either one because he's also probably the one that's done the most outside of Stranger Things. The most high profile things. So I think probably he's just over it. So that may be playing into it, but
I completely forgot he was in It.
Yeah,
he was great in It. Never mind. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah,
it's this weird conundrum where throughout this season specifically, he keeps calling Elle a superhero and mentions, I think at one point that like, I'm Lois Lane or whatever, and like the whole thing is like, yeah, it's really hard to write Lois Lane because for everyone always saying like it's really hard to write Superman, it's harder to write Lois, because here's a woman who can't do anything standing next to a guy that can do everything. How can you write that character so that has any sort of agency or ability to affect the plot? And I think they fell into that trap here. And Jimmy.
Superman's pal.
Yeah. Jinx. But yeah, it's that same old thing. I think with Will with Mike, it was, okay, the writers sitting down saying, okay, what can he do to help? And it's like, I don't know, he can pep talk her. And like, that's the only answer they can really come up with. So what they did this year, I think probably you're right, in response to 3, was say like, okay, instead of him being like an overconfident, like hormonal teenager, he's just going to be really checked out and like oblivious. And again, maybe that's Finn's actuality coming through, but I think that's in the writing too, because he's sitting right next to Will, and Will's crying and he does not saying anything. Yeah. I think it's because throughout the whole season, Will is only looking at himself. He's only in his own head. I keep saying Will. Mike is only in his own head, because all he's doing is like, from the moment that the L gets taken, Mike is like, what did I do wrong? We just had a fight. It's my first big fight. Like, I don't know what to do as a boyfriend who has a girlfriend mad at him. How can I make it better? And also, she's a superhero, so she's obviously doesn't need me. And like, all of these things are like, he's in his head, right? So he's super oblivious. And so I think that's in the writing, but I think it's exacerbated by Finn Wolfhard's own lack of trying.
11's like, Papa took me. Some bad stuff is going on. Mike's like, how does this affect me, though?
Yeah,
Are we still good?
He is all about himself. I
feel like we're not good. Are we good? Are you still like me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's my take on that. But I would agree. I think Dustin's out there with like a bat and like a shield, and Mike's just like, you can do it, El.
Yeah.
I believe in you, my friend.
I love you. And I don't say it enough. And
but I do love you, because Will told me to say it.
Can you imagine like walking through like 2 people's minds, and your boyfriend won't shut up telling you how much he loves you, and you're like, I'm being choked to death. I'm being choked to death. So
I don't need that right now.
You got to hold on a minute. You got to hold on.
It's so hard to concentrate when you're constantly in my ear telling me how much you like love me and how into me you are. I'm being strangled.
Yep.
I'm 2 minds deep, and I'm being strangled. Okay.
Inception style. Speaking of the Mind Palace, which is what I think they call that. I really dug that. I thought that was like a cool piece of set. If you see any like the behind the scenes photos, it's all practical. Like, it's on a green screen.
Are you talking about what, like the red?
Red, like the staircase,
I thought that was neat.
And like all that. Like it's all
I saw those photos
stuff
too. It's like those sculpted pieces, the stalagmites,
Yeah, it's really cool. Yep. And I was on board with all that. I sent you guys a meme earlier because I was like, I cannot be the only one that every time I look at Vecna, I think of the Grinch. But evidently I'm not. Did you guys think that?
Vecna did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Here's the reason why. Here's the reason why I thought you sent that. I didn't think he looked like the Grinch, but there was one time. It was the way he said Max. That I heard Max.
Max.
So when you sent that, I thought someone had tapped into that very specific thought that I had.
Maybe I just Googled Vecna Grinch because I was like, surely somebody had the same thought, because there's 2 moments in particular. Anytime you can see the full body Vecna and you can see his hip joints,
his belly,
exactly where the Grinch's big belly sat, and it's like, oh no, this looks like the Grinch. And then there's the moment. I think it's in the last episode where it's like a profile shot of Vecna and Max. Or maybe it's L. I can't remember. And he's like, I think it's Max. And they're in the snowball gymnasium or whatever. And he's like, creeping up on Max. And it's a side profile. And so you see like a lack of nose and a prominent bottom lip. And I'm like, this is the Grinch. He's just being Jim Carrey's Grinch right now. But all that aside,
do you think that he stands like he's got like a phone book? He's looking down at Hawkins. He's like, Abracadabra, who I hate you.
Mike Wheeler, I hate you.
I
think that's exactly what it is.
Speaking of when they used that set again, I'm guessing they had a lot of reference photos and took a lot of photos of it the first time it was constructed. Then they had to redo it. I don't know how much of it was CG or whatever, but I like that because it was like you finally have the confrontation with this person, the big bad, right? Yeah. In a way, and it's flashing back to this moment that matters to the character, but it also is like calling back to that moment. If you remember when we saw that, the ending shot of that season was the gym from the outside, and it panned up, and Every Breath You Take is playing. And yeah, and the Mind Flayer is like above the gym. Mm-hmm. So that was like it was like a cool little full circle thing. It was like a little Easter egg, but it also was there for a reason. So
yeah,
that was cool. That was a cool little, and it was an interesting place for a fight like that to take place. It wasn't like,
I agree.
A weird. It wasn't like they were fighting in the realm of Vecna. It was like this personal space. There was a gym that was for a high school or a middle school dance. So I like that.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah. It's smart because it calls back to a moment when that character was at her happiest, but it's also a moment, like one of the rare moments in the whole series where we, the audience, kind of felt like things were good, right? Yeah. Like we were kind of happiest. And so it kind of works on those two levels. And then of course, like you said, then we see the exterior and the Mind Flayer, but like in that moment, we're like, oh, I mean, I guess it's mostly defeated. Cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, as far as Vecna goes, like I really enjoyed the twist, so to speak, that he's one and that one is the orderly that was kind to 11 and like I enjoyed all of that. I know a lot of people saw that coming. I guess I wasn't thinking critically enough about it that I didn't expect it, so I was surprised by that and thought it was cool.
I thought that Vecna was number one, but I didn't realize that number one was the orderly.
Yeah. The only thought I had was that the orderly was number one because they mentioned she said something like number one or whatever, and he says that's a sad story. I'll tell you another time. And I was like, oh, maybe he's one. Mm-hmm. But I didn't put it together that one was Vecna. I just thought like, oh, whatever. But yeah, I mean, as far as Vecna goes, I enjoyed that character. Again, it's great to put a face to the evil, but his design I think is cool. I don't know that it's like going to be super iconic moving forward, like that we'll always be looking back at Vecna in the same way that we look at like, a CG villain like Davy Jones or a horror villain like, Freddy Krueger or Michael Myers or the Xenomorph from the Alien.
The Demogorgon itself is more,
Yeah, Demogorgon's more iconic.
And the Mind Flayer.
Yeah, for sure. But I do think that Vecna has a cool design. Again, don't know that it'll be the iconic thing from the series, but yeah.
It'd be hard to dress up as for Halloween.
Yes.
Right.
I do have total respect for Jamie Campbell Bower, actually, because I didn't realize he actually portrays Vecna, but like I saw like a time lapse of him doing the makeup, and I was like, I respect that.
Makeup?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought it was performance capture.
No, it's all practical.
Oh, wow.
It's
crazy.
Augmented, of course, like the vines and the pulsating, but yeah, it's all practical.
Maybe make his face
I thought
a
it was
little more.
him with, the usual get up and the
no.
ball. Yeah,
he sits in a makeup chair, and because that's how you save the money is like you do 90% of it practical, and then you just maybe make his face a little more like accentuate sunkenness or obviously instead of like his lack of nose being kind of hidden by the makeup, just actually push it back into his face a little bit. But because then you have all the lighting reference and everything that you need to actually make it look good because you've shot it and you've lit it on a practical face. But
there's like 8 to 10 hours of makeup every day.
Yeah. And consider too that like anytime an actor covers up their face to give a performance, I respect that. And especially Jamie Campbell Bower, who is maybe not in this series, but is a handsome person. In this series, he's scary looking even without that. Like when he's killing, you know, when he's like actually killing them and they show like, you know, he's like a real human with a face. I was like, shit, this is much creepier. Like if you woke up in the middle of the night and someone was standing over your bed, would you want to be Vecna in full makeup or just Jamie Campbell Bower with his eyes? I'd be like, oh.
Everyone always forgets that Idris Elba was the bad guy in Star Trek Beyond.
Yes, he was.
Like caked under makeup, you know?
Yeah.
Or have Murray standing over your bed. That's the third option.
Murray.
Yeah. He's like, hello. I brought you some vodka. Yeah. I don't know, guys. I guess that's all I really have to say about all of it. I mean, this is one of the shows that I think that my impulse is to dislike it because it's become too much of an expectation that I'm to like it because I'm a human who has Netflix. And so the expectation when anyone at any of my jobs brings it up, I'm really one of them more than anything, but like, oh, Stranger Things is so good. It's so good. And my constant need, as you guys know, to differentiate between what's really good and what's pretty good and kind of good and just fine. Like I have as many opinions and scales for quality as I have hairs on my head and right above my ass. And I think that
didn't need that last part.
And
going to sleep. So.
And that's where Stranger Things is. I think that I need to measure my words when I'm talking about quality because I just resist falling into a category of likes Stranger Things because I don't give it my universal praise, but by its very nature of being mostly well executed science fiction fantasy, it is something I enjoy, and it was obviously something where we were like, all right, the season's dropping. It's like we should watch that, you know.
I mean, I wouldn't say it's prestige television, but it is well done, and you know, it's certainly to me above obviously network television, and then probably even above most of what's on like, you know, AMC these days. So like to me, it's still well made and I enjoy it, even if it's not super original. And even if certain members of the cast seem to have checked out or just completely lost their minds, like Winona Ryder, it's just still fun to watch. And again, whatever happens next season may make or break it, right? Mm-hmm. Like right now I'm saying like, oh, I enjoy it. At the end of next season, I might be saying the whole show's garbage and I hate it. and that's what happens. Because I mean, again, I hate to keep knocking on, you know, this dead horse here, but like Lost, right? The first two seasons are great, but you have to make that distinction. Like the first two seasons are good and everything else is utter garbage. Yeah. And by association, the first two seasons are dragged way down because they're related to this show that's just awful.
Yeah.
And so
you always have to say Hangover 1 is pretty good.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah. You have to say the first two Godfather movies are worth it. Right. But you know, I think it's that same thing. It's if they are able to stick the landing next year and do something that feels satisfying, then great. The show's just fine. If they can't and the whole thing falls to pieces, which is possible, then my review right now may not still stand. But for now, as one chapter in this 5-chapter book, this chapter's pretty good.
Yeah, I feel kind of the same way as Dustin. It's something I always look forward to watching, and it is weird because usually you have these shows that come out and their first season is huge and everyone watches them and it's talked about TV. Mm-hmm. And then as 2 or 3 years go by, the viewership goes down, a new show comes in to take its place. And it's crazy to me that this show is like still just as popular as it ever was, if not more. So I feel like its trajectory has been interesting. But it's always something I look forward to watching, even if I'm not, you know, going to go out on a limb and say like Dustin said, it's prestige television in any way, but it is always thoroughly entertaining. And I enjoyed it. If the next season, I'm glad it's the last season, but if it's the same level of quality as the others, I'll be happy with that.
Yeah. And I know that they are working on some spinoffs, which the Duffer Brothers allegedly are going to be kind of hands off about. I'm like, yeah, I got no interest in a spinoff. I'm sorry.
Well, I keep seeing on Reddit, just random scrolling. They're like, it'll be 1,000% different. And I'm like, that intrigues me, but I probably won't watch. I'm just curious what the premise is. If it's 100% different, what does that mean? But spinoffs in general, I'm not
1,000%
really
is a
big
mathematical impossibility.
Right.
But yes, also 1,000% different is also completely untrue, because there's no way on earth that Netflix is going to let it be 1,000%
incredibly different. Yeah,
1,000% just like this.
That's 100%. Like here I am throwing out percents. That is what Kathleen Kennedy would say about her sequel trilogy. It's 1,000% different, and I'm like, actually, it's exactly the same, and it's worse.
And worse, yeah.
A true version of 1,000% different will be in the Stranger Things spinoff. We're doing a TV series based on the Jamie Foxx, Tom Cruise classic Collateral. And it'll be that drawn out into 8 episodes with different characters.
It's a slapstick comedy.
And one of them is Dustin's cousin.
Now, the spinoff. This is Bustin.
The one from Jersey.
The spinoff.
And the spinoff is called Bust a Move with Bustin.
Bustin Rhymes. The spinoff is Murray and Yuri open a restaurant together in right on the Bering.
It's a multi-camera sitcom.
Yeah, I was just about to say, if it's a multi-cam comedy with laugh track, I would watch. Yes,
it's in like an unoccupied island between Alaska and Russia. It's just here's the restaurant. Murray and Yuri make,
it's like,
I don't know, Jewish food. Some shit.
It's like,
very special guest star Ray Romano.
Yeah, here's a knock at the door. Jim Hopper.
Yeah, and everyone, he opens the door. Woo! Yeah. Woo! And he does the whole thing where he's like, all right, I gotta wait for. He starts to say his line.
Tries to say his line, and they haven't finished it. Yeah.
He's like,
you just kind of mug through the camera for an extra few seconds.
Okay. Yep.
What are you doing here?
So
I came to get some food all the way from Hawkins. There's some wild stuff that's been happening.
Yeah. I was in prison for a long time.
I'll have one upside down cake.
Looks right at camera.
Yeah.
End of show.
I'll have a hold the Demogorgonzola.
You worked on that joke too long for that to be what you came up with.
That was more for John. The Gorgonzola.
Get that one in the chamber. I like it. Someone should do that as a frozen pizza with the Stranger Things.
Oh, there we go.
Tie-in.
Yeah.
Demogorgonzola, I like that. It's pretty good.
Demogorgonzola.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Barb special. I guess that's like chili powder. You make it a redheaded pizza. Let's end this.
There you go. All right.
Okay. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Add the chime, the grandfather clock chime. And when I say good night, listeners.